The rain began as a whisper against the windows, a faint tapping that grew into a relentless drumbeat as the storm settled over the small lakeside cabin. The wind rattled the shutters, bending the trees outside into dark silhouettes that swayed wildly with every gust. Thunder rolled across the sky, deep and commanding, while flashes of lightning painted the room in sudden silver bursts. Inside, the fire crackled softly in the stone fireplace, casting a warm glow over the living room. Isabella drew her cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she peered through the rain-streaked glass. She had never liked storms. They made her feel both exposed and trapped, a contradiction she could never quite explain. Ethan, however, seemed perfectly at ease. He leaned against the wooden mantel, his tall frame relaxed, one hand curled around a glass of red wine. The firelight flickered across his strong jawline, making shadows dance across his face. Isabella tried not to notice how striking he looked in the dim light, but her eyes betrayed her. She had known Ethan for years, long enough to understand that being alone with him was dangerous. Not because he would ever do anything reckless, but because of what she felt every time they were together. There was a tension between them, unspoken but undeniable, a forbidden thread that had been woven quietly through their every interaction. The storm had cut off the road back to town, leaving them stranded in the cabin. Just the two of them. For hours. Maybe all night. "Looks like we're not going anywhere until morning," Ethan said, his voice low and steady, almost soothing against the chaos outside. Isabella turned from the window, her lips curving into a half-smile. "I suppose there are worse places to be trapped." His eyes caught hers, holding them a little too long, and in that silence, the air shifted. It wasn't just the fire warming the room. It was the way his gaze lingered, the way her chest tightened under the weight of it. She quickly lowered her eyes, pretending to fuss with the blanket draped over the sofa. But she could feel him watching her. Always watching. Ethan moved closer, not enough to touch, but enough that she could sense the heat of his body. "You look cold," he murmured. "I'm fine," Isabella replied, though her voice sounded softer than she intended. The storm raged louder, thunder booming overhead, yet inside the cabin, the silence between them grew heavier than the sound of the rain. She could feel her heartbeat picking up, betraying her calm exterior. Every nerve in her body seemed to hum, attuned to his nearness. When a particularly sharp clap of thunder shook the cabin, Isabella flinched, instinctively reaching for the nearest comfort. Her hand brushed against his arm, warm and solid beneath her fingers. She froze, intending to pull away, but Ethan's hand moved gently to cover hers, steadying her trembling fingers. The contact was innocent, comforting, but it lingered. Too long. Her breath caught as she looked up at him. His eyes searched hers, dark and filled with something she had tried to ignore for far too long. "Isabella," he whispered, her name almost a confession. She knew she should step back, should pull her hand away, should remind herself of all the reasons this was wrong. But in that moment, with the storm howling outside and his warmth seeping into her, the reasons blurred. One stolen glance. One touch that lingered. And the fire between them began to burn. The storm showed no signs of easing. Rain lashed harder against the windows, and the power flickered, making the fire's glow seem even more vital. Isabella sank onto the sofa, pulling the blanket over her lap. Her mind spun in restless circles, trying to steady the rhythm of her heartbeat, but it was no use. Ethan was too close, and she could still feel the ghost of his hand over hers. He lowered himself onto the armchair across from her, his posture casual, but his eyes carried an intensity that unsettled her. He swirled the wine in his glass, studying it as though it could distract him, though she knew it didn't. His silence spoke volumes. "Do storms never bother you?" she asked, desperate to fill the space with words. A small smile curved his lips. "I've always liked them. They strip away all the noise of the world. Make everything raw and honest." Her throat tightened. She wondered if he realized the double meaning his words carried. Sitting across from him in the dim cabin, it felt as though the storm had indeed stripped everything away, leaving only this undeniable pull between them. Isabella tucked her hair behind her ear, though her hands trembled slightly. Honest, she repeated softly. That's a dangerous word tonight. Ethan's gaze lifted to hers, steady, unwavering. Maybe honesty is the only thing we've both been avoiding. The air thickened, heavy with unsaid words. She wanted to look away, to retreat into safe silence, but she couldn't. His eyes held her, pulled her closer without even a touch. The fire popped, a log shifting, sending a brief shower of sparks upward. Isabella shifted under his gaze, pulling the blanket tighter, though heat coursed through her. She told herself it was the fire. She knew better. Ethan set down his glass and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Do you feel it too?" he asked, his voice low, rougher than before. Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, she considered denying it, laughing it off, pushing the words back into the dark. But the storm outside roared, fierce and relentless, as though daring her to match its wildness. "Yes," she whispered, the confession escaping before she could stop it. The silence that followed was electric, charged with something that could no longer be ignored. Ethan rose slowly, closing the space between them. He didn't sit beside her, not yet, but stood in front of her, his presence overwhelming. "Isabella," he murmured, her name tasting different on his tongue this time. He reached down, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was featherlight, but it set her skin ablaze. Her lips parted, 1,000 protests on the tip of her tongue, but none of them found their way out. She could only look up at him, trapped in the pull of everything she wasn't supposed to want. His thumb grazed her jawline, and her eyes fluttered shut for a second, betraying her resolve. "This is wrong," she breathed. "I know," he whispered back, though his voice held no intent to stop. When she opened her eyes again, his were searching hers, waiting for the slightest permission, the faintest crack in her restraint. And she gave it, not with words, but with the way her gaze lingered on his lips, the way her breath quickened. Ethan leaned closer, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to hold its breath. The storm quieted, thunder distant, rain softer, as though nature itself paused for them. His lips brushed against hers, tentative, testing, but the spark was instant. She inhaled sharply, her fingers tightening on the blanket before it slipped to the floor unnoticed. The kiss was forbidden. It was dangerous. It was everything they had promised themselves they wouldn't do. And yet, when his lips pressed more firmly, Isabella didn't pull away. She leaned in, surrendering to the storm inside her, to the fire that had been waiting far too long. The kiss deepened, slow at first, then hungry, desperate, as though years of restraint had finally broken. Her hands rose instinctively, gripping the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer, erasing the distance that had kept them apart. When they finally broke apart, breathless, their foreheads touched, the firelight flickering over their faces. "We shouldn't have," she whispered, though her trembling voice betrayed no true regret. Ethan's hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing her lower lip as though he couldn't let go of the taste of her. "No," he agreed softly. "But tell me you want me to stop, and I will." Isabella's lips parted, but the words wouldn't come. Because she didn't want him to stop. Not now. Not ever. And in her silence, Ethan found his answer. The kiss lingered in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. Isabella's heart thundered in her chest, her breath uneven as she tried to gather herself. But Ethan didn't move away. His presence was overwhelming, a force that seemed to seep into every corner of the room. The firelight flickered across his face, highlighting the heat in his eyes, the restraint battling with hunger. He looked at her as though she was both a salvation and a sin, and the storm outside seemed to roar louder, echoing the chaos inside them both. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling. She meant to stop him, to put space between them before they lost themselves entirely. But the moment her lips formed his name, his mouth was on hers again, claiming her in a kiss that was no longer tentative but fierce, desperate. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up. Her fingers slid into his hair, pulling him closer, kneading him closer. His hands framed her face, then moved down, tracing the curve of her neck, the slope of her shoulders, igniting every nerve he touched. She broke away for air, but he didn't let her drift far. His lips found her jaw, her throat, pressing soft, burning kisses against her skin. A gasp escaped her, her head tilting back instinctively as though surrendering to him. "This isn't us," she whispered, though her hands betrayed her, clutching at his shirt, keeping him near. "This has always been us," he murmured against her skin. "We've just been pretending." His words sank into her, dangerous and intoxicating. She wanted to argue, to remind him of everything at stake, but her resolve melted beneath the heat of his touch. Every inch of her longed for this, had longed for it far longer than she would ever admit. The fire popped again, a sharp crackle that filled the silence between her rapid breaths. Ethan pulled back just enough to look at her, his forehead pressed to hers, his lips hovering close. "Tell me you don't want this," he whispered, his voice rough with need. "Tell me to walk away." Her lips trembled, the words dancing on the edge, but she couldn't force them out, because they weren't true. Instead, her hand slid down his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath her palm. Her answer wasn't words, it was the way she leaned forward, closing the distance, pressing her mouth to his once more. This kiss was different, wilder, unrestrained. Years of silence, denial, and unspoken desire poured into it. Ethan groaned softly against her lips, his arms pulling her flesh against him, as though he couldn't bear another inch of space. The storm outside lashed against the cabin, rain pelting the windows, thunder shaking the earth, but all Isabella felt was the fire of his touch. His hands slid down her back, pressing her closer, anchoring her to him as though he feared she might vanish if he let go. She melted into him, her body betraying every rule she had built. The warmth of his chest against hers, the taste of his kiss, the strength in his embrace. Everything was wrong, forbidden, and yet it felt achingly right. When they broke apart again, gasping for breath, Isabella's lips tingled, her body trembling with both fear and desire. She searched his eyes, half hoping to find hesitation there, something that would help her retreat. But there was none. Only raw, consuming hunger. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice cracking. His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing her lip. "I can't stop," he admitted, his voice low, ragged. And deep down, she knew she didn't want him to. Their mouths found each other again, fiercer this time, and she let herself drown in him. Her hands explored, sliding down his shoulders, gripping his arms, reveling in the strength and safety they promised. Every kiss, every touch was a betrayal of reason, but neither of them cared anymore. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. The storm raged on outside, lightning flashing against the windows, but neither of them noticed anymore. Isabella clung to Ethan as though he were the only steady thing in a world that had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. His arms wrapped around her, his body warm and solid, his lips trailing over hers with an urgency that sent shivers racing down her spine. Every kiss deepened, every touch burned hotter, every whispered breath between them carried the weight of years of denial breaking apart. She had spent so long telling herself this was wrong, that it couldn't happen, yet in his embrace, nothing had ever felt more right. "Ethan," she whispered against his lips, her voice trembling with equal parts fear and need. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, his thumb brushing her cheek. "We can't keep running from this, Isabella." "I can't." Her chest ached at his words. It was terrifying, this surrender, but she knew he was right. The storm outside might have trapped them here, but it had also stripped away all their excuses, leaving only the raw truth between them. And the truth was simple. She wanted him. She had always wanted him. She leaned in, pressing her lips to his once more, silencing every doubt. He responded instantly, pulling her closer, their bodies fitting together as if they had been made for this moment. The fire crackled beside them, shadows dancing across their tangled silhouettes as the storm roared on, nature's fury mirroring the intensity of their desire. Time blurred. The world outside faded, leaving only the heat of his touch, the safety of his arms, the way he whispered her name like a vow. Every kiss was deeper than the last, every caress more urgent, until there was nothing left between them but the truth they could no longer deny. And when the storm finally began to soften, its thunder rolling into a distant murmur, they found themselves lying together by the fire, hearts racing, breaths still unsteady, wrapped not just in the blanket but in each other. Isabella traced her fingers lightly across Ethan's chest, her head resting against him. For once, she didn't feel the need to speak, to explain, to justify. She simply existed in the quiet aftermath, her body still tingling, her heart strangely at peace. Ethan kissed her hair, his lips lingering. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he whispered, "I don't regret this. Not a single moment." She closed her eyes, holding him tighter. "Neither do I." The storm outside had passed, but the one inside her heart had finally calmed too. What had begun as a forbidden kiss on a stormy night had become something far greater, something that felt like love. And for the first time, Isabella let herself believe in it.